transition towards the mid lane, have Scarra, our resident NA mid laner here, kick us off. But the big nerfs that I want to look at to begin with are the Vladimir and the Taliyah nerfs, of course.
Those were the first two champions I wanted to talk about.
All right, let's go.
Taliyah's been seeing a lot of play in foreign regions, not so much in Western regions, but almost 100% ban pick in Korea. I think that champion was just a time bomb waiting to go off. When they first buffed her, they buffed her, I think, 3 separate times, and the biggest change was the fact that they gave her extra pushing power on Q. Not just a little bit, not like 20%, they gave her 50%. However, now that that's all taken away, she no longer has the lane control to be able to really push out other champions and roam as much as she did before. I thought that she took the place of TF in terms of role on the team, and to some extent like kind of a mini Aurelion Sol. But now that her strengths are a lot harder to define, you might see a lot of TF come back into play. Additionally, Vladimir was the other champion that super oppressed everything mid lane, and not only did he get nerfs, all the counter picks to him people are playing a lot more. Stuff like Orion, stuff like Ryze, stuff like Kassadin. It's really, really hard to be able to play Vladimir, especially post nerf. Right. I think that kind of opens up the mid lane to very interesting picks. Like you saw Syndra come back, but now I think Ryze is being played a ton. Cassiopeia probably the very top dog at the moment. And then after Cassio, you'll see even stuff like Orianna has seen a lot of play because she does fairly well against the rest of the field if she doesn't have to deal with getting shoved.
It's Worlds, she's got to come back.
Well, I was going to say, after Cassiopeia, it feels like now the mid lane is wide open.
Yeah, I think Ryze might be really high up there as well if people have mastered that champion. And then Aurelion Sol, because that's taking the place of Taliyah, and there are some players who have put the time in, and his experience win rate is still incredibly high in the way he influences side lanes.
Right, but beyond those 3 champions, who else are we looking at in the mid lane? Of course, you mentioned Orianna. We have, LeBlanc still being probably
Syndra,
viable till the end of days.
I think Syndra, Ori, Ryze, Jace are what you're looking at. With Ryze, Jace being the wow, and Ori being the I wonder how much people are going to play of these champions. Everyone I know is playing Ryze, and I expect that to come back in full force. He seems very, very good, sets up ganks very well, and just scales super well throughout the game. Similar to the last Ryze, but a little bit weaker. And so it's just really scary because the current Ryze is just very, very dangerous when you fully master the rotations very well.
How much of a learning curve is Ryze for the entire team? Right, as we've like in terms of utilizing the ultimate.
I don't think much at all, because it's essentially on the Ryze player to play well. That's how I think. And for Ryze, you probably need somewhere around 20 games plus to be good. Not so much as Aurelion Sol, which you needed a bunch of games and you need to work better around him.
For Ryze,
for Ryze, it's if you're winning, then you could tell your team what to do. For Aurelion Sol, you're always shoving. So like you can get a lot more options, but your team also has to actively think about, oh, Sol could be in my lane at any point.
Now what about picks like Varus or Karma back in the mid lane from support? Or
I feel like the ones that I would be looking out for are Zilean. I think a lot of people are going to be playing the Zilean in the mid lane, and I think Malzahar is still going to hang around. I think he's still going to be around in that A tier, not so much S, but I still think he's going to be a great shove-in champion and somebody who has good control and gank
I actually think more towards this direction. I think that the top tier picks right now is like Ryze, Kassadin, Cassiopeia as well, because it's just so lane dominant. And then afterwards comes kind of Malzahar as well.
Well, now we talked about Elise and Zac being 2 of the junglers that can actually come mid lane and gank it rather effectively. Does the rise in power of those 2 champions affect the picks in the mid lane? Do you need to start playing safer picks, or is that just all about warding communication and avoiding the ganks either way?
I think it's more along the lines of just all the junglers want to fight more, and especially if top is switching to this more carry-oriented style. Originally, you didn't want to go top lane because you can lose so much pressure bot, but now maybe the top lane carry is now more predominant or better, and so with you having more access to the top side of the map, you're going to need a mid laner who's able to open up the map a lot easier. And so the value of, like, I guess pre-nerf Taliyah is very high, and then post-nerf, it's like you're looking at Sol. He wasn't available for a lot of periods of time, but Sol is a perennial, okay, I'm going to shove and run to somewhere else. And I think that Cassio, like all the wave clear stuff, Ryze actually wave clears like a monster right now. And so any of these champions that can just run with their jungler to like top side or bot side puts a lot of pressure on them. They're not able to perform when the mid lane is in full control of the other team, and so they have to play really, really far back.
Yeah, the interesting thing for me as well is a lot of these mid laners don't have move blocks or ways to avoid a gank.
Right.
You're talking about Malzahar, Aurelion Sol, like Syndra, Cassiopeia, Ryze, very low mobility here. The only ones I can really think of is like LeBlanc, maybe the Assassin AP Echo in mid. And those are the champions that really stick out to me here because there's some sleepers that might have a little bit more mobility in their kit because everybody is so low mobility themselves. Like there was that scrim that everybody saw where like Faker was playing Azir. You're like, why is he playing Azir now? So maybe that's like another pocket pick thing that comes out. Well, who knows?
I think it's to say a lot about how much mobility is needed because everyone's running Ghost in mid lane now. Ghost has become like one of the strongest summoners in mid lane, and it's because like the ability to team fight a lot better and even to like Ghost to other lanes to help them out is such high priority that it allows you to pressure a lot better with the summoner, and you lose maybe a little bit of 1v1 or solo pressure.
All right, so we've broken down a bunch of the mid lane changes and determined that there's all kinds of craziness going on there. Let's talk about the mid lane players who have to deal with those changes, and I think it's only fitting to start with Faker. How is he going to assimilate into the new meta?
I mean, I can't think of a time that he was at the World Championship and he wasn't pushing the meta. Ryze, Kassadin last year. Even before that, he was finding counters to people with playing the Riven in the mid lane and really innovating. So I feel like he's going to have a lot of things up his sleeve. He's a player that plays so many games and he's so dedicated to the game that he's going to be taking people off guard. But I also think that something like Ryze, right up his alley. Great mechanics, takes a lot of skill, and it's going to take him not as many games as other people to really pick that champion up, in my opinion.
Okay, that's fair. That's a good endorsement for Faker moving to Worlds. I agree 100%. Scarra, thoughts on mid lane players that will either be hurt or benefit by these changes?
I just specifically want to look at Huhi.
Okay.
So obviously I'm a big CLG fan. If you know anything about my past, I used to coach CLG. However, the biggest complaints about Hui that I've seen throughout the years is that he really fails on the execution part of things. More than not, he's actually in the right place at the right time, but when he's there throwing out skill shots or when he's trying to execute his maneuver or his play, he just kind of trips over himself, falls on his feet, about like 20-30% of the time. However, now with Sol being so strong, as well as Ryze coming back in the meta, those are his two best champions. If you look all the way back toward like MSI or even before then, those were his best champions, stuff that where he doesn't have to so much rely too much on the execution, but just being there at the right time. And I think that it's very favorable for CLG when you look at the mid lane meta being S tier picks around these two things.
Ah, that's interesting. That's very interesting, considering the fact that a lot of people were looking at CLG at the end of the summer split as kind of like a oof. They might not even be one of our top 3 teams, from NA going to Worlds.
Yeah, I still think he's going to struggle with depth of champion pool in terms of versatility and how deep he can go. Can he play those mechanically demanding champions at a very high level? Because those are 2 champions, and maybe he'll have like a third with Assassin Echo and stuff like that, and maybe LeBlanc, but can he play the Cassiopeia? Can he play the Jace and execute and all in appropriately?
And can he play against those? Because they will definitely pop up.
Yeah.
Like strong mid laners playing Cassiopeia is always like very scary.
He did play the Syndra as well. That's actually a good point.
Are there any mid laners that you're looking at?
So yeah, I would like to see like Pawn maybe, stepping in and playing like a Jace game or 2. It would be so great. I think the buff was really, really good for him. I think now that he has the all-in potential, it's like one of the most exciting champions.
Well, I mean, that's something to be considered here when we consider sub-rosters moving into Worlds. EDG having Pawn, in their back pocket, behind Scout, when champions like Jace might return to the meta, that's going to be pretty big for them to have that opportunity or option to sub him in at any given moment to play a champion like that. And with Jace, that brings in another point around AD mid laners. We mentioned Varus and we mentioned Jace being 2 AD mid laners that might have a place here, considering the fact that we talked about Kennen, Rumble, AP top laners, Elise, Zac, AP junglers. Do we feel like that's going to increase the priority of the AD champion pool in the mid lane?
I think definitely with Jace coming back, and Varus has always been a very strange champion because Western region-wise, not many people play that champion. However, when you look toward like China, you look toward Korea, Varus sees a lot of play all over the board. I think with the introduction of Kennen and Ryze and Rumble potentially coming back for top lane, as well as top priority jungle picks being Elise, maybe Zac, a lot of Nidalee, a lot of these AP-heavy picks, mid lane is going to have to be an AD, and you may see a lot more of Jace and Varus because of that.
For even more in-depth discussion on the Worlds patch, check out the links below.